If you think about every point in your career as a chapter, your entire career is the book. Every point in your career is a chapter. It should have a logical introduction, it should have kind of the body, the middle, and then a logical conclusion. And there have been times in my career where kind of mid-chapter, I've been approached about an opportunity. And whether it's gut instinct, whether it's good fortune, I've decided that the timing's not right because the chapter isn't closed, it's not written. And I want to be able to look back on my career and say there was a logical beginning and a logical conclusion to that. And it's time then to move on to that next challenge or that next opportunity.
I'm Sam McKenna, and you're listening to the Show Me You Know Me show, a deep dive on the impact of personal connection and empathy from the perspective of some of the world's most successful executives. Our guest today is Geoff Hakel, Executive Vice President at TransUnion. So I have to tell you, this was a fun one for me because Geoff and I have had the chance to work together for quite a few years. He leads the U.S. financial services and consumer indirect sales teams at TransUnion, and I can tell you that he brings some incredible and empathetic leadership advice to this interview as well. All right, so let's dive in. So it's 1998, you've just graduated college, and I hear it was a spectacular time to be on the market. I say that with a lot of sarcasm. But you got into sales basically the same way most of us did, which is you fell into it. You started working in newspaper ad sales.
Yeah, thank you for drumming that up, Sam. That is an awesome lead-in. As you might imagine, at the time, their advertisers have a wealth of outlets by which they can spend their ad dollars. And so everybody is competing, really fighting over those ad dollars. And at the time, a newspaper was at this point where print media was kind of still king. Internet was coming of age. And it was still this thing that's like, yeah, it's there, but like nobody really reads news online. So I was entering this profession. I knew I loved sales. I didn't necessarily know what I was getting into. And all of a sudden it became knocking on doors of car dealerships and grocery stores and furniture retailers and, oh my goodness, tanning salons. And it runs the gamut. And what was really cool about that is I loved immediately the ultimate freedom of being able to kind of chart your day and lay out what it is I need to accomplish today and set short, intermediate, and long-term goals. And recognize, that your hard work translates directly into compensation. So I was really motivated by that, but faced with the harsh reality of I know nothing about car dealerships. I know nothing about grocery stores other than I was once a cashier, which is a whole different career path. And going into these conversations, trying to truly understand the objectives of the customer and understand what a car dealership is trying to do through promoting themselves via advertising and print media is very different than what a furniture retailer might be doing. And so really trying to both, one, get through the front door, give them enough where they want to spend time with you and hear you. It was like this massive crash course in Show Me You Know Me. It was an amazing run for about a year and a half before I kind of saw the light. It was like, maybe I aspire to do something a little different than this, but great crash course, great foundation and entry-level selling.
I feel like we should give you royalties on Show Me You Know Me because it sounds like you invented it before we did in the end. But you always made the joke that you kind of put your, disguise glasses on for one call and then different disguise glasses on for another because suddenly you're an expert in groceries and suddenly you're an expert in car dealerships. But you really do need to do that homework. It's been almost 30 years since that happened. Why do you think Show Me You Know Me, right? And the art of understanding your buyers and their challenges might be even more important today?
I talk a lot about this is that our customers and prospects, they have at their fingertips vast amounts of information. And that vast amount of information gives them maybe coming into the conversation with you, a perception of who you are and what you do. And so they're already formulating opinions. And the way to kind of disarm that is to truly flip the script and engage in who they are and what they do, in understanding who they as a person are, who they as an organization are, and what they are trying to achieve. So I think it's a disarming element that can offset maybe a potentially a negative perception of, yeah, I know you do this, but you have all these competitors that maybe do it better than you. And so I love that ability to kind of engage and reset the dialogue, establish trust. Trust is such a huge word that is maybe overused. But I think in this sense, people do, it used to be, well, people do business with the people they like. And I believe that to be true. But I also believe people in many ways are trusting their career with the people, their suppliers, their partners, the people that are bringing to them solutions. And establishing that trust, I think, is critical for the foundation of that mutually beneficial relationship.
I think you make such good points. And I think for those listening, they might say, well, that's table stakes. Of course, the sellers are going to show up knowing something about the buyer, but it's actually pretty much a rarity these days. I want to shift to after that role. So you jumped from newspaper ad sales to a different role, and then you got recruited away to TU, which may I point out, when you got recruited away, TU wasn't much of anything. It was a startup kind of before startups were a thing.
So my stop between ad sales and TransUnion was with a company called Coventry Healthcare. What we sold was group health insurance to employer groups. I look back on this now and it seems like the Stone Ages, but my job was not only going and sell why you want to provide our benefits to your employees. And at the time you're competing against, it was Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And we provided managed care. Managed care was new, it was different. There was a stigma associated with, oh, I have to get referred here, I have to get referred there. Well, long story short, part of the sales process was also, once you got to a yes, the yes was contingent upon what is the premium we're going to charge for that group. The underwriters would decide that. And the underwriters would decide based on medical questionnaires. What's really interesting and kind of scary, and then again, seems very prehistoric, is that I would have to go into the employer group, deliver a stack of papers that were medical questionnaires that each of the employees would then need to fill out. Jane Doe, suffering from lupus, all of this highly, highly sensitive information. A week later, I'd come back, I'd gather that stack of information, I'd put it in my car, I would drive it back, I would hand the folder to an underwriter. The underwriter would then go through and they would determine the rate. So we got to a yes, contingent upon the rate. But in that process, Sam, what was crazy to me was, wow, there's all of this sensitive information. I'm carrying around a manila folder. There's got to be a better way. Isn't there data out there that sits in a database that would allow an underwriter to kind of automate that process so we didn't have to ask for sensitive information? We didn't have to transport it in a way that at the time seemed normal. Looking back, it seems reckless. And so I say that in the sense when I was called about the job at TransUnion, I was curious, like TransUnion, well, they're the credit report people. What I found was they were starting an insurance vertical. They felt there was an opportunity to mimic what was being done in financial services. So when you go apply for a loan, they come to our database, they bring in information in the form of a credit report or a score about how you've been a custodian of your finances, how you've paid your bills, how you've taken out loans and you've repaid them. And that's a predictor of future risk. They wanted to replicate that in insurance. And I said, so wait a minute. So you have a database of information that's going to be used to underwrite insurance where the impact to the consumer is, yes, I give you permission under the FCRA, it's a permissible purpose. So they have permission to go and access that data. And I was like, well, this is exactly what I thought the industry needed. Now, it was not health insurance. This happened to be an auto insurance application, what made that even more timely was, if you think about the late 90s, this notion of direct to consumer automobile insurance, Geico, Progressive were kind of the two early entrants. At the time with direct insurance, you don't have an insurance agent going out and literally walking around the vehicle to determine if there's pre-existing damage. They're not sitting across from the prospective policyholder and getting some assessment of the driver. And so third-party data that resides in databases is literally the only way you can do it and do it at scale and do it direct. At the time, all stars aligned. It met what I believe to be a need in the marketplace. TransUnion seemed to be building something that was going to be very timely and kind of on the cutting edge of where the industry was going. Fast forward now, everybody carries a smartphone. I literally bought my son a car the other day and as we were closing on the deal, they said, you need to get an insurance card. And within a minute, I had the app up, added the new car to the policy, showed it to them, and they said, okay, you're good. That would have never happened without the access of data. And so anyway, I leapt at this opportunity to move to TransUnion, recognizing it was a bit of a startup, but a very cool and well-positioned with what I believe to be a great trajectory, both from an industry that we're serving, but also from a career standpoint.
Later in your career, you had the opportunity to develop an insurance program for not-for-profit hospitals through TransUnion. Tell us about that.
So when I started with TransUnion, I was literally selling data. Geico was my first client. It was amazing. It was fun. We were very hyper focused on like two core products. However, the insurance vertical was viewed as, wow, that is really successful. Where else can we replicate? So we did financial services. We now have this insurance thing that's happening, and we were viewed as, okay, it's cool and it's growing. Maybe we want to try that again. And lo and behold, they said, hey, we need somebody with a healthcare background. Well, I could parlay my background into insurance. Obviously I did, as well as my knowledge of the healthcare industry, given that it was health insurance was my prior role. It's the proverbial, oh crap moment. I'm fortunate enough to earn the role to write the business case for TransUnion to enter healthcare. And entering healthcare was very different than insurance, very different than financial services. But that was the business we grew immediately. We knew that hospitals were buying credit reports. And so what we identified is they were using consumer level credit information to determine eligibility for charity care. Charity care meaning I don't have insurance. I don't have a means to pay. I have a health condition that needs treatment. And not-for-profit hospitals have an obligation to provide a level of charity care. And I said, well, that's great, but how do we do that at scale? And so we actually identified a company that was building a software platform by which we could automate all of this, insert our data into it, just that very narrow niche market, not-for-profit hospitals, that went from $0 to $10 million in 3 years. What's most interesting, I think, about, yes, these hospitals have an obligation to provide charity care, but they also would feel a lot of pain if they didn't, in that they would lose their not-for-profit status. And there were massive implications. So again, it's understanding the landscape of the business, applying what we do to be able to address the industry concerns. So that was a fun little run.
You have had so many opportunities come your way. I think one question probably a lot of our listeners have is, how do you know when it's time to move on or to try something new? You've spent an incredible career at TU in different roles. How did you know when it was time to shift?
I'm big on analogies, and I'll resist the urge to use a sports analogy because I'm told by my team I do that too often. So I'll use the analogy here of kind of writing a book. If you think about every point in your career as a chapter, your entire career is the book. Every point in your career is a chapter. It should have a logical introduction, should have kind of the body, the middle, and then a logical conclusion. And there have been times in my career where kind of mid-chapter, I've been approached about an opportunity. And whether it's gut instinct, whether it's good fortune, I've decided that the timing's not right because the chapter isn't closed. It's not written. And I want to be able to look back on my career and say there was a logical beginning and a logical conclusion to that. And it's time then to move on to that next challenge or that next opportunity. And as I've viewed it through that lens, knock on wood, to this point, it's served me very well. I think I've been with TransUnion for 26 years. And in that time, I feel an obligation to the organization to do right by them and not leave roles in an area where there are gaps and there are jobs that are complete. And so I think always viewing it through that lens makes me feel good about kind of the contribution I've made, leaves the organization in a place where it's an opportune time to introduce kind of that next person to take my prior role. But that's always how I've thought about it, Sam.
Let's talk about sales. And I've held mostly off for as long as I possibly can, but I'd love to know how you've led such successful sales teams over the years.
I think we talked about the word trust being overused. The word authentic leadership, or the words authentic leadership, sometimes are overused, but I think it's really pertinent here that bringing your authentic style to the role will create followership. One specific thing we do as we're leading a team, our sellers provide us feedback a lot. We ask for feedback. Feedback is a blessing. We all know that. But the feedback's only as good as how you incorporate that. And one thing that we hear across the board all the time. We want to hear more from our peer sellers. So we do both at our annual sales meeting, during team calls, via town hall type conversations that we do what's called hear from a peer. It's different than me talking to them about, well, here's exactly how we should handle various different. So it's literally sellers saying, here's the scenario. Here's the team we brought to bear on this. Here's how we navigated a challenging negotiation, a challenging competitive environment, a challenging renewal, a challenging new sale. That lands so much better when it's coming from a peer group, because I think it does a couple of things. It makes it more real and more granular, more tangible for the audience. It also, by the way, I think we all know sellers are hyper competitive. And it's like, okay, that team is on the stage talking about this incredible win they had and how they navigate it. I want to be the next one up there. I want to be the peer that they hear from. And so we've had really great success in not the leaders talking about how you go and win or how you address a certain situation, but the peer groups conveying that information. It's true, it's genuine, it's authentic, and it comes out in a way that is very, very impactful to the broader team.
You also do something that we do here, which I just love. We call it our oopsie poopsie channel on our Slack channel. And it's where we celebrate our mistakes. We own up to the things we should have done better so that people can see that we're human. People can see that we're just like them. And we can also just make those mistakes a little bit light. I always say we're going to make mistakes and 100 more today. The whole idea is to share those mistakes so that we don't keep making them again. Tell us about the celebrating mistakes, that process on your side.
Well, celebrate is a strong word. We learn from our mistakes. We celebrate our wins. We learn from our mistakes. In sales, especially in the industry that we're in, you're going to lose more than you win. I think the gift of losing is only as precious as the opportunity to learn from that and a chance to turn that loss, that learning experience into a potential win the next time. So we coach our teams, we execute sales strategies. We then kind of debrief what went well, what didn't. We incorporate learnings. We have to do better the next time. We often talked a lot about it at our most recent sales meeting, our sales kickoff. What are the repeatable wins? But those repeatable wins often come on the backs of mistakes or learnings. And so while I won't say we don't have an oopsie poopsie channel, but
You're welcome to borrow it.
Yes, we may do that. But I think the point is well taken, is whether it's quote unquote celebrated, it's got to be acknowledged, harness the learnings from it and turn that into the next potential win.
I love that. I also want to hear, I think you have a very cool story around your dedication to coaching, which I love. I would coach all day long if I could. But even how you led youth football and baseball teams when your children were young. Why has this been so important to you?
What I love most about my job is coaching people and interacting with people. And my job's really demanding. I travel a lot. I'm away from home and each and every year. And by the way, I'm a retired coach now because my kids are at an age by which I'm no longer allowed to come down to high school coach. This one year in particular, I had a young boy come out, first time playing football. His parents reach out to me and say, this individual, it's his first time playing sports. He's struggling at school, doesn't have a lot of friends. Forget about whether he ever becomes a great football player or not. He wants view this as kind of his tribe. And I said, look, we have a very inclusive team environment. These kids really bond and come together. So this young kid comes out, he's not very good, but he is so just the nicest kid, the most coachable kid. He wants to do well. I would witness him engaging with other kids. And before I know it, he's forming friendships. We found out this kid, he's a bigger kid, a huskier kid. He was very self-conscious about his jersey being tight. I'm like, jerseys are supposed to be tight. It's okay. We have bodies come in all shapes and sizes. We find out that this kid, not only is he a little bit huskier, but he runs really fast. And so we found this spot for him where he was contributing and he was making friends and he was celebrated. And at the end of the season, I'll never forget this. he came to me at the end of the season. He said, "Coach, I want to give the year-end speech." And I was like, "Well, of course. Like, what do you want to talk about?" He goes, "Well, you'll see." He talked to the team about the impact being part of a team made on him and how he grew and developed and felt like he was part of something in his friendships. And you talk about like going and like doing something that is volunteer work for that type of payoff. Like I could never replicate that. And by the way, we learned kind of early on in why he needed football so bad. His mom was diagnosed with cancer
Uh,
and had this battle at home. And so this was his escape. And he talked openly about it. And it was really amazing. So to see that, the impact that you can have through coaching can be very profound. And I think that does translate. So to move it off the youth football field, translate that into what we do day in and day out. And it is very profound and it's very moving and very impactful.
I think you're someone who loves to do all this coaching work. Tell us about a colleague that recently reached out to you for advice. What was that experience?
Yeah, we were back to our sales meeting that we had. Again, we're talking upwards of 850 sellers in a massive room in Las Vegas. I'm on stage as part of a leadership panel. And, as part of you've been through these before where you have kind of a little bit of scripted questions where they're asking you to talk about the strategy and how sellers can help execute that strategy. And then of course you open it up for questions. And the questions, if you can imagine a room that is 850 people, there are two microphones and each microphone is kind of in the aisleway and it has a spotlight coming down on each of them. Typically in these environments, you don't get a lot of people that are brave enough to kind of stand up, literally walk into the spotlight and ask a question. So we always have questions set aside that we can use to fill space. Well, sure enough, this individual stands up, excuses himself through the entire aisle of people, walks to the microphone, and he says, "Geoff, I have a question for you." And I said, "Thank you for your question." He said, "My name's Xavier. I want to understand what's the best career advice you could give." And of course, as simple as that question is, that is also one of the hardest questions you can get to answer kind of off the cuff in a coherent
So
way.
loaded.
And he thanked me for my answer and sat down. And it was 2 nights later, we were at our closing event and I'm walking through the sea of people. We have Cirque du Soleil doing some performance, above us. And it was a really fun environment. And all of a sudden I bump into this gentleman and I walked up to him and I said, "Xavier." And he was like, "Geoff." And I said, "I want to thank you again for your question." He said, "Well, I really appreciate you answering that. And like, tell me more about it." So we talked for 5 or 10 minutes. And I said, "Xavier, anytime you ever," by the way, this individual is in our inside sales team. So very entry level, very new in his career. I said to him, "Just the fact that you had the guts to ask that question tells me a lot about who you are and your interest in growing your career. And because of that, anytime that you ever meet with me, you reach out and I'll make sure we have time." And that was, I love those, people that are ambitious, because I can tell you when I was at that point in my career, I probably wasn't stepping into the spotlight, asking the question in front of 849 of my peers.
I think that is actually a quality that has led to a lot of my successes, always having kind of that bravery to network with a scary executive or do things like that. And you make me think of a quick story where when I was at LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner, who was then our CEO, came to the DC office. And the DC office is like, 23 people big. So we're really going to get some FaceTime that nobody else gets. And so we were going to get some Q&A time. And I thought, as I've always coached people to do, don't ask the generic question. Don't say like, "What keeps you at LinkedIn?" And so I'd show me, me to him and did some research. He was on the board of Donors Choose, which is a really fantastic teachers organization. And they had recently been in the news because a company had fulfilled every single teacher's list in Donors Choose and got 9 million, something like that, or $92 million, an insane expense, but got tremendous advertising out of it. So while everybody's like, "What keeps you at LinkedIn?" I said, you, as a board member of Donors Choose, must be thrilled that this happened. And we talked about it. My question was really different. I remember afterwards, he came up to me in the office and he said, "Great question," and then walked away. and I melted and I died and I was really excited. But I love that Xavier made this impression on you. Can I ask you one final question? How does somebody get a meeting with you? How do they stand out? How do they show you they know you? What does it take to stand out in Jeff's very, very, very crowded inbox?
Such a great question. This is not the only podcast I do. We've evolved over the years of how we disseminate information. We've gone from just the proverbial monthly town hall, quarterly team meet, whatever it might be, to during the pandemic, I was writing kind of a monthly letter. And it was some business, but it was mostly like personal and about like what I'm observing the team's going through and how I'm handling certain things and coping with, at the time, kind of a really uncertain environment. At one point, I really, really regret this. I made the comment about a cookie being the best cookie I had ever. And it happened to be a cookie from like the little convenience, like cafe on the first floor of the TransUnion headquarters that had been wrapped in cellophane for probably a week. And it really wasn't a good cookie, but nonetheless, we wrote about that in one of our letters. And so it was also repeated then in the podcast that we do. And so I'll get people that'll reach out and the subject line will be best cookie I ever ate.
Yes. First of all, how dare you about the cookies? Second of all, phenomenal. Great. Show me you know me. They made an effort, right?
Effort. And so whether it's that, whether it's something that, I shared about like a family vacation, people will do that. They will, and by the way, you've trained them too. So it's not organic. It's happening through your influence. And I will skip over, my P&L report, my sales. I'm like, oh, somebody wants to talk about cookies or wants to talk about grilling or what, if it stands out. And by the way, I also am admittedly not a dessert person. So I lacked all credibility with the cookie comment, and people call me out on that too. But it's a really fun way of engaging with the team. But when those emails come in and it stands out in the inbox as they listened to the podcast, they read the letter that was sent out. It's like, okay, that's one that's going to get an immediate response.
Thank you, Geoff. What a pleasure to have you on and hear all these stories. And thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Very appreciative.
I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did. It is truly one of my favorites. Now let's get into it to answer some burning questions from our audience. All right, who's ready for Sam Spills? Let's get into our Q&A. Great question on leadership. I want to be a great manager and I want to elicit feedback from my team. How can I encourage my direct reports to be open with me? Well, first thing I would say is it starts with you and how you show vulnerability or you own up to your mistakes. People are going to have psychological safety created for them when they have a leader that is open, that is self-deprecating, that is honest, that's transparent. So for me, one of the things that I do is I own my mistakes. When I say the wrong thing to a client, when I miss a deadline, when I should have said something different, we even talk about it on the Slack channel that we have at SamSales called Oopsie Poopsie. That's right, very maturely called, but I love it so very much. And so we'll drop things that we see and we'll drop things that we do in there. I think I also use self-deprecating humor to own those mistakes, right? So somebody might say, hey, you invited me to this event, but you didn't tell me what date it was on. And I would say, that'd be helpful, huh? I'll own the mistake in a lighthearted and humorous way, just so they get a sense of the fact that, again, I'm owning that mistake. And then I think you can say, like, listen, like, one of the things I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be better about the way that I go about this. I'm trying to be better about my one-on-ones. I'm trying to be better about our team meetings. Like, are you getting value out of them? Like, how do you feel about them? How would you run them? Is there something different I can do? What are you missing? And just open it up like that so that they can feel like they've got a place where they can give you feedback. And then the key is how you react to that feedback. Not only the feedback you look for, but feedback that they proactively give you. If you want more feedback and somebody comes to you and says, I don't feel like I really get a lot of your time. And you're like, well, do you know how busy I am? Probably not going to feel comfortable bringing it to again. What's your strategy for analyzing LinkedIn engagement? What should I be monitoring? What processes should I set up to maximize the impact of a post? Okay, let me tackle just that first piece. So what are the analytics we look at? Here's some easy math that you can do. I want you to look at your last post, the one that you think did okay, or the one that had good engagement, but like the impressions were pretty exciting. Take your impressions and divide them by the likes that you got. What's that number? If you have a celebratory post, that post is probably around 30 or 40. If you had a decent teachable moment post, that number is probably 50. And if you had what we call a dark social post, right? That number we're looking for is 70 and above. So take the impressions divided by the likes and look at what that number is. That's what I look at to see, are people sharing this? Are people interested in this? Did this fly to other people in LinkedIn groups and Slack channels and things like that? Because what that means, and you get above that 70 mark, is it means that people thought one person said, this is great, sent it to a Slack channel. Maybe 7 other people saw it. They clicked on it, they saw it, they read it, and then they left. Because maybe they don't know me. They don't already follow me. They don't follow you. Right. And so what that means is that it got shared more broadly. People came in, maybe they even looked at your profile and then they left. But it means there was value there. It got shared. And maybe you want to double down on exactly what you said in that post. Thanks for listening. And by the way, if you liked all the LinkedIn tips, we have plenty of resources for you to check out on our site. You'll find them all linked in the show notes below.